It was the war that defined a nation that is often forgotten 36 years after the U.S. had claimed independence. The British came back, armed with ships and set to attack Baltimore. 200 years later, they celebrate what did happen. The British were turned back.
On September the 11th, the British ships were spotted right down the Patapsco River over my shoulder right there. On the 12th, they landed troops to try to take the city by land. Unable to do that, they bombarded Fort McHenry, where we're standing, on the 13th of September.
They're paying tribute to that monumental week when the bay in the background was a battleground, and perched overlooking it stood Fort McHenry.
Fort McHenry was one of the first series of forts built by the American government. Back in those days, all our forts pretty much were, or all our cities were along the East Coast. So Fort McHenry protected the city of Baltimore. It was built just before the War of 1812. It's here on a narrow peninsula. So for anyone to sail into the city, you have to sail by Fort McHenry. So Fort McHenry is what stood between the might of the Royal Navy and the people of Baltimore.
They were never able to penetrate the waterway. The British had to succumb. What would it have looked like when the ships came in from England?
So during the War of 1812, during the battle, if you look down the river there, imagine seeing nothing but ships from where you see those cranes there, all the way over to where the smokestacks are over there. They're coming. Yeah, they came within about a mile and a half of the fort. That's where the fort's guns opened up.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
But what also emerged in what they celebrate on this day was an observer, a man who drew inspiration from what he witnessed. That is what inspired Francis Scott Key to pen what would become our national anthem.
He was watching the whole battle from afar. By dawn's early light on September 14th, looking through a spyglass, he could see that the flag was still there, and the rush of emotion that he had propelled him to write the words that became our country's song. Nicholson, who was a captain, takes it to a printer. It's strung up on handbills, so it's spread in newspapers and little flyers throughout the city of Baltimore. It catches on like wildfire. It went viral, okay? It was your text message.
It went viral in 1812.
It was viral. It was your text message, right?
You can feel that sense of patriotism here, where a group of soldiers were united. Different backgrounds, two that stood side by side epitomized it.
One was a U.S. Army private. His name was William Williams. He was born enslaved. His real name was Frederick Hall. He changed his name, escaped slavery, was sent to Fort McHenry after joining the American Army, was mortally wounded in the attack. Another man who was mortally wounded was Lieutenant Levi Claggett, a rich Baltimore businessman, belonged to the local militia.
The city of Baltimore has been cited many times for its role in the history of this country. Much of it centers on being the center line for the Civil War. But its pride stems from what it did to hold up a country, a philosophy, a dream. Is Baltimore a proud city? Do they relate to the national anthem?
They do. That's why, like in the Orioles games, when they say, "Oh, say," everyone yells out, "Oh." It's not disrespectful. It's a symbol of pride that, you know, this is where it all happens.
Here you can feel that long before we existed, there was a spirit that set the tone for the country. That 2 centuries cannot separate us from those that fought for us. And as you observe this festival, you realize how the American dream lives because of it.
I think it's a great time for people to reconnect with their national anthem. We sing it, but a lot of times people just go through the motions. They don't always appreciate the words or think about the words.
And you wonder what the author of the Star-Spangled Banner would say if he was here on this day to see what became of his inspired script.
Francis Scott Key would be inspired, and I think he'd be surprised. I don't think he really knew that his poem would catch on like it did.
Speaking from the heart.
He did. But it wasn't about him. He did not sign that first draft. He wrote what he felt, he put it on paper, he gave it to one of his best friends who was in the fort, so he figured, hey, you would appreciate this because you were there.
Life to the Max is brought to you by Life Touch, photography for a lifetime.